Okay, very, very good topic today. How to conquer your fears, or how do you overcome your fears? And many times, fear holds us back in our life, in how we do things in life, or if we want to achieve things in life, and it's just not a good feeling to have. So, I'm going to talk about this from my own personal perspective and my own experience, how I conquered my fears. Okay, and I'm going to talk about irrational fears, and then there's the general fears. So, I'm going to talk about three examples: sharks, lack of money, and public speaking, because those are the usual things that people are afraid of. So the first step, and there are three steps to this. The first step is to truly understand you don't fear what you really fear. Okay, what you think you fear, you don't really fear it. You fear something else. So I'll give you an example. Fear of lack of money. What is it about lack of money that you're afraid of? Is it the fact that it's going to be hard to pay medical bills in case there's an emergency? Is it the thought that if you're hanging out with your friends and they say, hey, let's go out, let's go here, let's go there, you can't go because you don't have the budget? Is it because you no longer are able to do impulse purchases, which you're not supposed to do anyway? But like you can't buy what you want to buy, you can't eat where you want to eat, or is it just the overall feeling of I need to have this amount of money in the bank, and if it goes lower than that, you begin to panic, right? So there are different things there. For public speaking, for example, is it the fear of being laughed at? Is it the fear of being not liked or rejected? Is it the fear of not feeling prepared enough, that you're not credible enough, that you don't know what you're really talking about? So those are different things. Like my fear of sharks, personally, my fear of sharks is not really the shark itself. I fear the feeling of helplessness. Okay, so your fear actually has levels to it that you got to understand. You got to kind of deconstruct that fear and find out what you're really afraid of. For sharks and me, it's the feeling of helplessness. It's the feeling that you can't really do anything. Once the shark goes under, you can't see it. You got to hold your breath just to look, but you don't really know where it is. And it's the feeling of not knowing when it's going to strike. So it's the not knowing and not being able to do anything about it. Okay? So one way to find out what you really fear beneath that fear is to ask yourself, how did it begin? My fear of sharks began when I was very young. I was sick during the summer, and I was staying at my cousin's house, they all left. So I was left home alone, and they had Jaws, part 1, 2, and 3, all on VHS. So I watched them all straight, 1, 2, and 3, because I was bored, and I was laughing, and I thought it was really silly how they're so stupid, how they're just swimming out there, with the sharks. There was a shark warning, they didn't believe. But that night I had a really, really bad nightmare, and I woke up really afraid. And then after that, I just started fearing sharks. So you gotta know where it came from. If you're afraid of public speaking, was there a time in your life when you spoke in public and some people laughed at you, some people said bad things about you? Fear of lack of money, was it because there was a point in your life where you didn't really have money and then there was an emergency, or everyone went out and had a great time and you were left all alone because you didn't have the budget? Like, where did it begin? If you know where it began, it's easier to find out what you really, really fear. All right, so you don't really fear what you fear. There's something else. There's a level to that. So you gotta figure that out. The next step is to understand that fear is a very powerful emotion, and many times it's not rational. So the next step is to really separate the rational from the irrational. You gotta remember that. You gotta bombard yourself with facts that, what I'm afraid of, where's the rational side, where's the irrational side. If you're afraid of bees, for example, maybe you got stung in the past, you're so scared, it was you spent 2 weeks at home and it was very painful, so you're not afraid of the bee, you're afraid of what it can do. But if you find out the rational and irrational side of things, like all bees are bad and evil, that's not it. You got to understand that when you study your fear, you're going to arm your mind, your brain, with more facts that can separate the rational from the irrational. So let me say something. With my fear of sharks, I actually watch Shark Week. I kid you not. I watch Shark Week and I study sharks, and I was freaking out about it at first. Before, sharks on a screen, I can't even look at sharks on a screen. Like if I see a big picture of a shark on a wall or something, I get freaked out. When I get into department stores and I see this, that there's this big statue of Maui. It's a big, human with a shark head with a surfboard. I see that and I used to freak out. Now I don't anymore. That's how much I feared sharks before. So you gotta separate the rational and the irrational fears. Um, there was a movie with what's her name, Haley Berry, a shark film where there's this guy in the water and he was holding onto a boat, and while he was holding onto the boat during a storm, a shark was eating his legs. And so I couldn't sleep with my limbs, my feet or my hands outside the bed because I was so afraid that sharks would eat my limbs on dry land, right? So that's how irrational my fears got. So you gotta separate the rational from the irrational. Remember, it's not always gonna be the same thing. Like, if you got bit by a spider before, doesn't mean every single spider bite is gonna cause you 2 weeks of pain and that, for the entire summer you're not gonna be able to hang out with your friends. It's not always gonna be that when you do public speaking, people are gonna speak bad about you, talk bad about you behind your back, and laugh at you. That's not always gonna be the case. When you lack money, it's not always going to be the case that there's always going to be someone sick and you're always never going to pay the bills because someone's always going to be in the hospital, in the emergency room, and that's not always going to be the case, right? So study about finances. If it's public speaking, study about public speaking. Is it a fear of sharks? Learn about sharks. All right, so you got to separate the rational from the irrational. And the third and final step is the most difficult. It's the most difficult, but it's also the most rewarding, I promise you. All you gotta do is make conscious effort and intentional steps to expose yourself. You gotta expose yourself to your fear. You got no choice. Like, I'm so scared of sharks that what I did was I got into free diving. Right now, I am a certified free diver, and that's crazy, right? So I intentionally have to go deep. My younger brother said, yeah, let's go scuba diving. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna freak out. I'm really gonna freak out. But I still did it. I did it just to conquer that fear. Right now, I'm not as afraid of sharks as I used to be. I could go under the water, in the ocean, in the sea. Before, I could not swim in a swimming pool at night because it's dark and it reminds me of, Jaws. Now, at night, swimming pool, I'm uncomfortable, but I can do it. Right? When I free dive in the blue, like the really blue waters, I can do it and it's fine. If it's for its public speaking, then you just gotta look for ways to be able to speak in public. Maybe pray in public right before everyone's about to eat. Just say, "Hey, can we pray?" and then volunteer to lead that. If you attend church, why not start reading do scripture reading, or if they're allowing preachers, then volunteer to preach or lead Bible study. Things like that. If you're afraid of lacking money, for example, try studying about finances, and it's difficult to expose yourself, like intentionally go broke. I'm not saying that, but maybe have different bank accounts or separate them or do something to expose yourself to what you really, really fear. If it's being afraid of not being able to go out because of a budget, then tighten your budget for a month or two. See how it works for you. See how you go through the feeling, the emotion, and all of that stuff. But basically, overcoming fear is not overnight. It's a process, and you got to really be intentional about it. You got to make conscious effort and intentional steps. So just to summarize again, number one, you don't really fear what you fear, so find out what you're really, really, really afraid of. And number two, you got to remember, fear is so powerful as an emotion. You got to learn to separate the rational and the irrational. Okay, so number one, what do you really, really fear? Number two, separate. Okay, so number one, what do you really fear? Number two, separate the rational from the irrational. Separate those two. And number three, expose yourself. You got no choice. Just expose yourself, because in the end, new experiences equals new beliefs. And when you have new experiences, it will give you new beliefs. Those new beliefs will counter the old fearful beliefs. I hope this was helpful to you guys. I hope this was something that you could use for your life. God bless you.